And joining us on the line right now is Eli Lake, columnist for Bloomberg View, national security reporter. Good to have you with us, Eli.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so I want to start out with the comments from Ashton Carter this weekend talking about how ISIS is in control of Ramadi and what happened when ISIS faced the Iraqi troops, who were carrying, by the way, a lot of U.S. weaponry.
What apparently happened was that the Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight.
So there you go. That's Ashton Carter. Now, he has a reputation, our current Secretary of Defense, of telling you exactly how the cow ate the cabbage, giving it to you straight from the shoulder. And he apparently did that. And a lot of people are sort of squirming that maybe he may have been a little too honest and a little too direct.
I think that kind of candor is welcome, to be honest with you.
I do, too.
I mean, we've been getting a whole line of stuff from the administration about how these were reversible. It wasn't that big a deal that they took Ramadi. Remember, you're hearing all this stuff before, and it's good to hear, an honest assessment. And the reason that that is such a stinging rebuke is because we've started allegedly training, or retraining, I should say, the Iraqi army and equipping the Iraqi army. And there has been a huge dispute. The Kurds, as well as some of the tribal groups that want to fight ISIS, say that the military is the wrong way to deliver the weaponry and training in this new war, and they would like to get that directly. And so far, the Obama administration has resisted this because they believe that if they start directly arming and training, well, they are training the Kurds, they're directly arming the Kurds and directly arming some of these tribal groups, then they will be contributing to the dissolution of Iraq, which pretty much is already happening. I mean, Mosul, we're coming up on the one-year anniversary since ISIS took Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. Now they have Ramadi. So, that's already happening, and, the Iraqi army has proven an unreliable vessel for American assistance.
So last week, Josh Earnest and the White House all said, listen, this is a bump in the road, but, we're continuing with our strategy in ISIS, and overall our strategy is working. But that strategy, Eli Lake, involves the Iraqi army fighting for their country. It involves the Iraqi people actually stepping up. The president even said it. Listen, the Iraqis have to defend Iraq. That's part of the strategy. So by Ashton Carter coming out and saying this, isn't he also basically questioning whether this is the right strategy?
Well, ultimately, you want to have a national army that's capable of keeping all of Iraq's many enemies at bay. The problem is that army is broken and it hasn't healed as a result of the new American engagement. One of the things that could and has made a difference in the past is that you have really our best guys are these special operations trainers that are on the ground. They are, by the way, boots on the ground, and they are training these Iraqi military units. Now, traditionally, these special operations guys would go out into the battle with the units that they're training. That was one of the tactics that was used very successfully in the surge of 2007, 2008, 2009. But, this is the sort of thing that happens all over the world. Obama has avoided that. He does not let the special operations trainers go out into the fight with the Iraqi units they're training. So that's one thing that could change that I think would make a difference. It would stiffen their spines in a lot of ways, and it's something that the military has been calling on the sort of authorities to do that for a while.
But wasn't this all foreseeable? I mean, if you look at the history of Iraq, it was always a factionalized nation that was kept in check by the fact that you had a dictator, okay? So we go in and we take out the dictator, argue that case if you want to, whether that was a smart move or not, but it's done. And you have to understand that in that region, without a strong presence, and I would say the Iraqi military backed by the U.S., was a strong presence, there's going to be a vacuum, and vacuums get filled by bad guys in that part of the world.
Well, I don't think this was inevitable. I don't think it's just a matter of the U.S. pulling out. I think it was because as when Obama came in and you had a new ambassador, Chris Hill at first, the policy was to treat Maliki like he was sort of the prime minister of a normal country. And before that, under Bush, Maliki was, we held his hand. We saved him from himself. So Maliki, sensing that the Americans were going to leave no matter what, began to consolidate power and weakened his army by putting in yes men and cronies. And that really was a huge blow. And then add to that just the sort of normal corruption where there would be supplies sent out to the front lines, they'd be sold in the market. and the guys were like, hey, what are we fighting for? And then, Maliki himself has a lot to blame by going after civilians and nonviolent protesters among the Sunni population. That sort of opened the door for the infiltration, sadly, of al-Qaeda, or now as it's known as the Islamic State. I don't think any of this was inevitable. I think if the U.S. had stayed more engaged, the Army would survive and there would be progress here. Unfortunately, we're back at sort of square one. And I don't know if at this point the timeline for rebuilding the Iraqi Army is going to coincide with the timeline necessary for beating back ISIS.
Eli Lake, in your declassified column at Bloomberg View last week, you revealed that many people within the Israeli government were concerned that the Obama administration was going to sort of reveal or allow the UN to reveal the full extent of Israel's nuclear weapons program. You report this morning that that's not going to happen. The Obama administration is so what changed?
I say, the Israelis, were really concerned about it, and a senior government official told me that they thought that the Obama administration was going to allow a resolution that would basically mean by next year, within a year, there would be a conference where, the Israelis would be pressured to acknowledge they have nuclear weapons and ultimately begin the process of disarmament. It turns out in the end that the Obama administration did not concede to this final document for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference over this one issue and their objections to it. So they stood firm, even though the Israelis kind of going into the final round of this did not know where the U.S. would go, and up to the last minute, I think we're really concerned. But eventually, after I write that column, it turns out the Obama administration decided that it wasn't worth it, and because these are consensus documents, that meant that even though they agreed with everything else in this review conference, they ended up not giving a consensus, and therefore the ultimate review document failed.
We got a dump of documents on Friday before the long weekend from Hillary Clinton's server, the one she handed over to the State Department. They started to slowly go through them, and there wasn't a lot in there. I guess that's not surprising given the fact that she had 2 years to clean out all the damaging stuff. But so they land over there, and one of the things that we learn is that people were telling the Secretary of State fairly early, guess what? This has nothing to do with the movie. There was not a protest that surrounded a movie that the Muslims found offensive. It really was a well-planned out attack that they've been working on for some time, and they knew that fairly soon in the process.
As I've reported, everybody knew this. This was something that anybody who was following Libya knew, and there was a series of attacks that led up to it. They had been tracking some of the guys who they later found out were participating in it, particularly the second wave attack against the CIA station was, way too coordinated. The mortar shots were too precise. Nobody thought this was just sort of a spontaneous reaction to an internet movie. Though I'll tell you, one guy who at one point did was Sidney Blumenthal.
Yeah, who's been consistently wrong.
Yeah, who Obama said could not have a senior State Department position, but it turns out he remained a kind of Hillary advisor, even though she doesn't want to have lots of old friends. Sidney Blumenthal is one of them. I think Sidney Blumenthal has now kind of become an issue in this campaign. And, there's a lot of, what's he doing? He's representing the Georgians that were ultimately kind of took over after Misha Saakashvili. This is a little bit in the weeds, but that's very important to know because the government that replaced Saakashvili's government, who was very pro-American and came to power after kind of a democratic revolution, has ended up imprisoning half of the Saakashvili government, bringing Georgia backwards and more into Putin's orbit. The other thing that, there's this weird, who are these Libyans that Blumenthal's working with, and did he have to register as a lobbyist for that?
Right.
All interesting questions, I think.
I think you're right, absolutely. Thank you so much, Eli. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.